Minecraft mobs come in all shapes and sizes, from the mighty ender dragon to the pointless bat. There are currently 84 mobs in Minecraft with more to come. As Minecraft keeps changing, and with some of these mobs being in the game since the very beginning, it's inevitable that mobs will be buffed, nerfed, reworked, or occasionally just broken by mojang. This video compiles 101 of the most interesting historical mob facts, diving deep into the multi-year-old versions to find the most obscure and peculiar changes that have been made to mobs over the years. Even if you're a seasoned Minecraft player, I guarantee you won't know most of these facts. Without any further ado, let's get into this. Starting all the way back in survival tests, did you know that pigs and sheep used to drop mushrooms? This was the only food in the game, and you could eat the mushrooms directly to heal your health. How Notch decided mushrooms should come from these animals is beyond me. Because the pig is a basic mob, you might expect this development to be boring, but it was actually quite intriguing. You see, Notch originally messed up the pig model. He showed a messed up model and commented, "It looks creepier when animated." He would follow up by adding creepers to the game, of which would fight the player similarly to how zombies fight, but only when you killed it, the mob would explode. Yeah, unfortunately your options were to either let the creeper attack you or make it explode, destroying part of your world. And the creeper's explosion was so powerful back then, it destroyed water and lava. But it didn't just destroy them, as the source blocks would drop on the ground for the player to collect and hold in their inventory. This again was changed quickly. The version of Minecraft this was possible in is not archived, meaning unfortunately it cannot be played today. Creepers weren't the only mobs to drop unusual items, however. Zombies had their own quirks. Originally, before chickens were added, zombies would drop feathers. As Notch claims, he just didn't know what they should have dropped. In addition to this, zombies also didn't die in sunlight originally. The daylight cycle was non-existent when zombies were originally added, so it would have been difficult for zombies to have a place in the game if they had died to light. When the change was made to force zombies to hide during the day, sunlight wasn't the only form of light they would have to worry about. In earlier in-dev versions, if a zombie walks too close to a torch, it would catch on fire, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. Despite zombies dying to sunlight since late Minecraft in dev, baby zombies wouldn't die to sunlight until official release 1.13, about 8 years later. As annoying as it was having to deal with these guys during the day, it's hard to say if making them catch on fire made them any less annoying. If you really want to see something annoying though, then look no further than the beta Enderman, who actually had a lot of similarities to zombies surprisingly. Endermen made zombie sounds as a placeholder when they were originally added. They could also pick up any block, including bedrock and mob spawners. Unfortunately, they didn't drop these blocks when killed though. Hostile mobs have gotten a lot of changes for sure, but what about passive mobs? They don't do much, so you might think there isn't a lot to say, but it might interest you to know that pigs were the only mob to drop food at one point. There was no beef, no chicken, and no mutton. Originally, each passive farming mob had their own unique drop. Pigs provided food, cows provided leather, chickens provided feathers, and sheep provided wool. It wouldn't be until beta release 1.8 where cows and chickens would finally drop food, and not until official release 1.8 until sheep would drop food. Since each of these three mobs still provide the original goods they were intended for, it kind of left pigs without a purpose. Pigs weren't the only mob to drop pork originally though. Did you know that before rotten flesh existed, zombie pigmen dropped cooked pork chops? This was really useful because there wasn't another source of food in the nether. A lot of players were upset when this got removed for rotten flesh, but many years later in 1.16's nether update, the new Hoglin mob was added to drop pork chops, giving players a reliable source of food in the nether again. Zombie pigmen used to look a lot more creepy, having blood patches on their body. Notch said this was too gory and thus changed these blood red patches to a rotting green. Ghast used to have a pretty weird quirk before beta 1.7, where they would target the camera instead of the body of the player. This meant if you went into F5 mode, the ghast would miss you, thinking you were where the camera was. Enderman also had a creative maneuver players could use to avoid it in the early days. As you probably already know, water will hurt Endermen, so if you're in a battle and losing, you can temporarily become safe by surrounding yourself with water. However, the Enderman would instantly teleport out of the water and then wait for you to get out of the water. But before beta 1.9, if an Enderman touched water, it would become neutral again, making it much easier to deal with. Also, before this update, they used to burn in the sun like other hostile mobs like zombies. And if Endermen weren't easy enough, you could shoot them with a bow and arrow, or any projectile in fact. When they first came out, they were not immune to projectiles like they have been for most of their life. Unlike Endermen, zombies used to be a lot stronger. Up to version 1.2, they could break down iron doors. The fact that they could makes me wonder what the point of iron doors were before this update. If you think that didn't make much sense though, wait until you figure out that the slime mob would spawn in peaceful mode before beta 1.5, but only the tiny ones. Thankfully, the tiny ones couldn't hurt you, but before alpha version 1.0.12, even the big slimes could spawn in peaceful mode and they weren't so friendly. They were rare though, only spawning below Y level 17, and only in specific chunks, unlike flat worlds which spawned a lot of slimes. If you start up a new flat world today, you'll still find slimes everywhere. But it was immensely worse when the flat worlds were introduced, to the point where the spawn rate had to be nerfed twice. Even though the number of slimes that spawned in early day flat worlds were incredibly high, they had a major weakness that wasn't changed until version 1.8, which was their inability to swim. Slimes would sink like a rock. This also went for its magma counterpart. However, this was the opposite for the Blaze, who was a mob that used to be able to swim in water and lava, but was later changed to sink. If the ability to sit in lava pits and fire at players wasn't overpowered enough though, know that they also used to have a 32 block firing range, double what it is today. Okay, I know we got a bit off track talking about the hostile mobs again, so let's dive back into the passive mobs. It might surprise you to know that even though a Blaze used to be able to swim in water, a baby chicken could not. Well, it technically could, but up until 1.8, a baby chicken would not be able to keep its head above water, leading to it drowning if it tried to swim for more than a few seconds. And if chickens didn't seem weak enough already, in early alpha versions of Minecraft, they would take fall damage. They still fell slower than other mobs, but they may as well have rested their wings, because once they touch the ground, KFC is served. Bunnies, on the other hand, did not take fall damage when they were first released. Looking into the history of bunnies is kind of crazy. Did you know originally the bunnies had a 0.1% chance of spawning as a killer bunny? This hostile bunny would rush at the player, dealing 6 hearts of damage per hit. This was unironically one of the scariest mobs to encounter, and they could spawn in peaceful mode. And just in case you didn't think bunnies were strong enough, they also had 5 hearts instead of 1.5 like they have now. This isn't the first time an annoying mob's health was toned down. Silverfish used to have a staggering 10 hearts, more than double what they have now. Pufferfish and salmon also used to have 10 hearts, but their health got toned down to less than 1/3 of that. One mob that got unfairly weakened in its history, unfortunately, was the parrot. When parrots were first added, a player could use cookies to tame them. This was revolutionary in a way, because cookies were considered to be one of the most useless items in Minecraft. However, due to a viral Reddit post pleading Mojang to remove it due to real-world concerns, cookies were made to poison parrots to death. Also, in the early days of parrots, they would change colors while dancing to a jukebox, but this was removed quickly as well. Oh Mojang, why'd you have to take all the fun? Mojang doesn't seem to take big risks, and the Giant's history makes that abundantly clear. For most of the Giant's life, it has done absolutely nothing and has never been able to spawn naturally. In version 1.8, its AI was completely removed, making it essentially a statue. But in snapshot 18W50A, the Giant's AI was randomly brought back, acting similarly to a normal zombie while moving twice as fast. These changes were quickly reverted, leaving many players wondering why these changes happened in the first place. It's somewhat understandable to an extent though. These changes happen in snapshots, and snapshots are experimental. There are other examples, such as the 1.8 snapshots, where endermites would sometimes spawn from endermen teleporting, or 1.17 pre-release 1, where magma cubes would just straight up ignore you. You know it's over when even the magma cube doesn't care anymore. This change was similar to a change in snapshot 18W50A, where the witch was changed to be a neutral mob. In this same snapshot, witches were also given a new purple hood. Like other major mob changes, these changes were reverted very quickly as they were unintentional. There was another particular change made in a 1.8 snapshot though that made sense, and it's surprising how fast it was removed. From snapshot 14W11A up to 1.8.1 pre-release 1, mobs would run away from a creeper that was about to explode. Mobs have always gotten updates to make them smarter, so this seemed like a logical step at the time. However, it had to be removed due to performance issues. I'm surprised that nearly 10 years later, Mojang hasn't found a way to make this mechanic work without breaking the game. Breeding animals to create new ones is nothing new. In the early days of Minecraft, all animals could be bred with wheat. With new crops added over time, the required crop to breed changed for some animals. Maybe there was something different in the wheat back then though, because breeding mobs in these days would result in an adult animal popping out. That's right, there were no baby mobs. But it wasn't just animals that could be bred with wheat in the early days. In Beta 1.9 pre-release 2, snow golems could also be bred with wheat. Yes, snow golems. This was reverted so quickly, it's hard to believe that this was ever intentional. It didn't even really work right when it was possible. One weird feature that was intentional though was the ability to breed chickens with nether warts. Only from version 1.4.2 to 1.7.10 was this possible. One mob you definitely didn't want to breed with wheat though was the wolf. Yes, it used to be possible to breed wolves with wheat, but if you did, your wolves would bug out and just remain sitting forever. So just give them a steak. One breeding mechanic that actually made sense though was how dyed sheep would always give birth to a white sheep. Using artificial dye to alter a sheep's wool color won't change its genetics, so when this was changed, it actually made less sense. But hey, at least it's convenient. One convenient change that was unfortunately taken away though was the ability to breed cows and mushrooms. It was weird because even though they're technically different mobs, they're still basically the same. If you use shears on a mushroom, it turns into a cow. I don't see how one little snip can be the difference between two mobs being able to breed. Speaking of milk producing mobs, did you know that squids used to produce milk? In Beta 1.2, you can go up to your local squid with nothing but a bucket for some delicious squid milk. Squids were very weird in the early days. Originally, they couldn't even swim in 3 dimensions, they just swam at the bottom of lakes and oceans. If that sounds stupid, then wait until you hear how dumb wolves used to be. If something hurts you in Minecraft, your tame wolves would attack your enemy to defend you. It's also possible to shoot yourself with a bow and arrow, therefore hurting yourself. If you did this before Beta 1.6, your tamed wolves would kill the entity attacking you, which is you. But even earlier in the first version where wolves were introduced, there was a glitch where if your wolf was not sitting down when you logged off, it would become wild and need to be tamed again upon logging back in. This wasn't the only glitch that happened by simply logging off and rejoining though. Before official release 1.5, if a player left and rejoined their world in the presence of a spider jockey, the mob would separate into 2 separate mobs. If you wanted to get a screenshot of this extremely rare mob, you had to make sure to take it quick. This was the complete opposite when it came to the magma cube however, who before 1.8 would never naturally despawn. Squids were another mob that used to not naturally despawn. Some people like to build aquariums for their captured squids, knowing that they'd always be there. And if you built an aquarium, you might not even have to capture the squids, because before version 1.13, squids could spawn in any body of water instead of just rivers and oceans. You didn't need an aquarium to have a squid pet though, because before version 1.4, squids did not suffocate when exposed to air. But one mob that probably would suffocate if Minecraft had realistic physics was the baby pig. Until release 1.2.4, you could use a saddle to ride a baby piglet just like a normal pig. I know it's just a game, but this just looks painful. Saddles used to be exclusive to the pig, but nowadays they're also used with horses. But did you know that when horses were first added, this was not the case? Upon the horses addition, a new horse saddle item was added. It functioned identically to a normal saddle, with the obvious difference being you needed this saddle to ride horses and it only works with horses. However, the horse saddle actually had a crafting recipe and was stackable up to 32, just like how horse armor used to be. Horses are the only animal that have equipable armor, but there have been other animals that used to be able to wear armor. When pandas were first added to Minecraft, you could equip armor to them with a dispenser. You wouldn't be able to see it, but it's there. If you killed the panda, it would drop the armor you equipped it with. It was actually a sort of neat way to hide armor. Dolphins could also wear armor when they first came out, and you didn't even need a dispenser. You could just toss them the armor and they would keep it. Just don't give them Death Strider boots. But unfortunately, no enchantment would make up for the dolphin's biggest weakness. because originally they would only survive 10 seconds out of the water instead of 2 minutes like today. Sometimes you might have accidentally taken a dolphin out of the water though, because originally they were able to ride in players' boats. Just about every mob was able to be transported via boat, so it makes sense why this was the default when they were first added, but it really just didn't make sense, so it was changed. Another default that was later changed was nether mobs taking damage from fire. Most mobs in Minecraft will take damage if they're on fire, and this includes nether mobs in the alpha days. Although it did make the nether easier to traverse, it never really made sense for nether mobs to take damage from lava, since that's their natural environment. Weirdly enough, in version 1.16, piglins and hoglins were added to the nether, and despite that being their natural environment, they're not immune to fire. So what do I know? Interestingly, the Guardian and Elder Guardian mobs were completely immune to fire damage. You'd think a mob closely related to water would not like fire. Maybe they had some magic water shell layer. But regardless, since these mobs lived in water, them not taking damage to fire made no difference for most people. When it came to phantoms though, them not taking fire damage made a huge difference. If you didn't get rid of them during the night, they would follow you through the day. Thank goodness they changed this. I think a lot of people take for granted the quality of changes Mojang has made to make mobs less frustrating and better over the years. For example, fighting iron golems used to be very different, because before version 1.9, they took knockback like most other mobs. Speedrunners use a tower method to stay out of range of the iron golem when fighting it. If you did this in 1.8 or earlier, it would take longer. Bats were also really annoying when they first came out because they could trample your crops. But to be fair, for this to affect you, you'd have to build your farms underground, which doesn't make any sense. Invisibility potions didn't always work properly on some mobs. Sometimes a certain part of the mob would stay visible. Mobs affected by this up until 1.8 include the wolf, sheep, and mushroom. One really big quality of life change made a bit more recently though was pillagers no longer being able to open doors during raids. Raids are difficult enough to deal with in Minecraft, so it being harder to shelter yourself than it already was not what the game needed. Pillagers also used to kill baby villagers up until version 1.18. Boy, were they ruthless back then. And if they didn't seem evil enough already, it gets worse, because when a pillager's crossbow broke, they would perform a Nazi salute pose and become passive. When Mojang found this out, they freaked out and just straight up deleted pillagers' arms temporarily. Chickens are the only mob in Minecraft with 2 breeding methods. You can breed them with food like any other farm animal, or you can wait for them to lay eggs and throw the eggs for a chance for more chickens to spawn. But why would Mojang implement a second breeding method? Eggs originally could not be used to breed chickens. It's rumored that the original plan was to eventually allow eggs to be placed like a block and they would eventually hatch a new chicken, similarly to how turtle eggs function today. But because of a tweet made by a user named Sir Wild saying that if Notch made eggs throwable, he would eat a USB drive, Notch decided to go this route. It's funny that even though chickens have 2 breeding methods, neither of them are even remotely accurate to how chickens reproduce in real life. If Mojang deleted feeding cookies to parrots because it might harm them IRL, then why does Mojang keep egg throwing to breed chickens in game? Mojang is inconsistent when it comes to changing the game for realism purposes. One change they made that does make sense is removing the ability for pigs, sheep, cows, and chickens to spawn naturally in ice plains biomes. The climate is clearly too cold for these animals to be comfortable in an environment like this, but one environment you would not expect a mob to be comfortable in that actually was the snow golem, of which would fight and actually damage the ender dragon before version 1.9. I always love how stupidly aggressive these mobs were despite how weak they were. It's a shame more players don't keep these mobs around in their worlds. They're actually really great cheap bodyguards. Most players probably don't think about them because you have to build them, but did you know that before version 1.13 they could naturally spawn? They weren't really ever supposed to, but because all you need to do is stack a pumpkin on top of 2 snow blocks to summon one, it was very probable that a pumpkin patch could spawn in a snowy biome, and thus the blocks would naturally form to perfectly summon a snow golem without the need of a player. The reason this doesn't happen anymore is because Mojang added a second type of pumpkin that doesn't have a carved face. This faceless pumpkin is the one that would now spawn naturally, but the carved one was required for the snow golem. So the best you could get naturally is a lifeless, faceless pumpkin spawning on top of 2 snow blocks. There was another impossible mob spawn that happened early in Minecraft in dev, where sheep would spawn without wool. Sheep can still spawn naturally today obviously, but they never spawn without wool. Sheep would not be able to produce wool in these in-dev versions either, but instead would drop string, gunpowder, feathers, and even flint and steel. When sheep originally had wool, all you had to do was punch it and it would drop 1 to 3 pieces. But later you would need shears in order to get its wool, at least without killing it. When this method of obtaining wool was introduced, it was more beneficial than punching it because you would get 2 to 4 wool from the sheep instead of 1 to 3. However, this was changed later so that the shears would only give you 1 to 3 wool per sheep. If you really wanted to obtain a lot of stuff though, then you would have loved some of the villagers in the old days of Minecraft. There were some pretty decent villager trades in the older days of Minecraft that you won't see today. Some of these include items that never even appear in villager trades today, or items that you shouldn't be able to obtain in survival mode at all. Examples include flint and steel, eyes of ender, ender pearls, and the arrow of luck. It's always interesting to see how Mojang dealt with certain mobs in the early days of the game. A lot of mobs in the early days had placeholder drops for a variety of reasons. I've already gone over a couple in this video, but a more modern example was the phantom dropping 1 to 4 pieces of leather instead of a phantom membrane. Ultimately, we just had enough ways to obtain leather, so it's good that we got the phantom membrane item. This new item was useful because it could fix your elytra. It makes sense considering phantoms are flying mobs and the elytra is a flying tool. The elytra is found in the end dimension, so it would make sense if that's where the phantoms were as well. But they naturally spawn in the overworld only. This wasn't always the case however. When added, phantoms could spawn in the end dimension as well. As fitting as this was, Mojang wanted phantoms to be a mob that was only active at night, and the end dimension didn't have a day-night cycle. It also would be really annoying if you're just trying to explore the end and phantoms kept following you and you couldn't get rid of them because, well, phantoms have been a nighttime mob for a long time. But there was a brief period soon after the phantoms were added where instead of burning in the sunlight, they simply disappeared when the sun rose. If only the glow squid could do that permanently. Clearly, some mobs get a lot of changes during development. That's going to happen when you develop anything new. One early example of a massive change was to mob spawn eggs. When spawn eggs were added, the markings blended heavily with the color of the egg, which didn't look visually pleasant, so they were changed quickly. Here is the comparison between some of the old and new ones. Not every mob had a spawn egg originally, but some spawn eggs would spawn more than just the designated mob assigned to it. For example, zombie spawn eggs would sometimes spawn zombie villagers, and skeleton spawn eggs would spawn wither skeletons in the nether. Spider spawn eggs would also rarely spawn a spider jockey, and yes, this meant a spider jockey spawn in the nether could have a wither skeleton rider. However, from version 1.9.4 all the way up to 1.13, spider jockeys didn't spawn. There was a bug where only the skeleton part of the jockey would spawn. At least the skeleton had a weapon, unlike the spider jockeys in Minecraft Alpha that didn't spawn with a bow. Another minor bug that didn't affect gameplay but was still interesting was that before version 1.21, monster spawners on multiplayer worlds would show a pig icon but still spawn the correct mob, with the exception of cave spiders, of which was the only spawner that would show the correct mob. Why cave spiders? I couldn't tell you. Another thing I cannot comprehend is why it took until version 1.20, the most recent version of Minecraft, for slimes to be affected by jump boost potions. No other mob had this issue, and it took 9 years for it to fix. The jump boost effect would still mitigate the slime's fall damage before the fix, but gave no extra boost. The slime jumping mechanic has always been kind of weird. For example, before 1.8, slimes used to all jump the same height, regardless of size. Eventually it was changed so that their jump height corresponded with their size. This change happened right before the bug reports of slimes not being affected by jump boost started rolling in, so there was likely causation. Withers are a nightmare to deal with on the Bedrock edition of Minecraft compared to the Java edition, but withers used to be more powerful on the Java edition in other ways. Before version 1.4, withers could break end portal frames, which they should never have been able to do since they're supposed to be an unbreakable block. Until 1.8, they could break barrier blocks too. If you were building stuff in the early days of Minecraft Creative, it would probably be best to just not incorporate withers altogether. But by far, the best thing about the wither is that it used to be able to ride on a minecart, something that should have never been possible because it's so big. Withers were certainly not the only mob to do the impossible in their history. The skeleton horsemen also had a massive bug in version 1.9 where they would sometimes spawn with multiple of the same enchantment on their armor or bow, which is impossible to create even in creative mode. Since mobs occasionally dropped their armor and weapons, this was obtainable. This wasn't just a visual glitch either. Gear with multiple of the same enchantment was more powerful. Sometimes in Minecraft, general changes will be made to a whole group of mobs for consistency reasons. I already brought this up with the invisibility potions on some animals, but an even more general change that most people likely have no clue about is Mojang resizing 9 different mobs in version 1.9 ever so slightly. The difference was also within a couple of tenths of a block. It's unclear why exactly these changes were done, but it was likely to help these mobs fit better in their hitboxes. There was another small, inconsequential, questionable change that was made to Enderman over the course of its life. It was actually more like a series of changes. When Endermen were added, they could pick up Netherrack, but they were no longer able to as of Beta 1.9 pre-release 1. However, when Endermen changed to spawn in the Nether in version 1.10, their ability to pick up Netherrack was returned. However, with the 1.16 Nether update, Endermen could no longer pick up Netherrack once again. It seems like to most players it wouldn't matter. The fact that Mojang changed the interaction multiple times shows that they must really care. Another change I'm not sure what the reason for was to the parrot from Snapshot's 19W41A to 19W45A, when they would no longer be able to imitate pandas, polar bears, wolves, zombie pigmen, or endermen. They seem like a random selection of mods to single out, and it's disappointing that my parrot can no longer bark. Later on, parrots would no longer imitate hostile mobs when the world was set to peaceful. Before 1.16, a parrot could replicate the sounds of mobs that didn't exist in a peaceful world. So I guess when you set your world to peaceful, you're also erasing part of your parrot's memory. It gets weird if you really think about it. Another weird historical fact about Minecraft's polar bear was that it used to be considered a hostile mob. Although they can hurt you if you attack them, they're pretty chill most of the time. But until version 1.14, you could kill them to complete the Monster Hunter achievement, and you had to kill at least one to complete the Monsters Hunted advancement. Polar bears haven't changed a lot over the years, but in Snapshot 19W39A, the polar bear model was randomly broken. It's always fascinating when something that has been working perfectly fine for years suddenly breaks even though it had no related changes. It was fixed pretty quick, but I'll never be able to get this image out of my head. In the same snapshot, panda bears had the exact same model issue. Seriously, how does this kind of thing even happen? When version 1.17 was released, the freezing effect was added alongside powdered snow, and polar bears, the mob who was native to all of the ice and snow biomes, were able to freeze to death. If any mob should be immune to freeze effects, it definitely should be the polar bear. If that wasn't strange enough though, even the snow golem, the mob literally made out of snow, would take damage from being in the snow. But if there's any mob that absolutely should take damage in cold, wet weather, it's the mob that's literally made out of fire. For the longest time, blazes took damage in snowstorms for obvious reasons, but in 1.16, they were changed to no longer take damage from the snow. This change really confused me. It not only didn't make sense, but was so minor and unnecessary since a blaze is almost never in a snow-filled environment. One problem that wasn't so minor though was the fact that, like skeletons, witches could fight each other if provoked. Although this mechanic doesn't necessarily not make sense, there was the unintended effect of witches getting into endless fights, because if two witches got into a fight with no interferences, it would simply last forever. This is because they attack slow and will heal themselves if their health becomes too low. So as of 1.14, witches were changed to never aggro onto each other. There you go. 101 obscure facts about the history of Minecraft mobs. I hope you learned a few things from this video. If you did learn something and enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe so you can catch the next one. If there's any interesting fact I missed, leave it in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.